All right, welcome back. We're on module 5. So these are the key terms. We have power, which is an expression used to represent the product of your repeated multiplication. A power has a base and an exponent. We have base, which is an expression that is used as a factor in the repeated multiplication. Exponent is a number of times that the base is used as a factor in the repeated multiplication. So if we look at this example, this is a power. This whole thing is called a power. So 2 to the power of 5. So 5 is the exponent, 2 is a base. Okay, so we call this as 2 to the 5th power. So 2 to the 5th power, or 2 raised to the 5th power. So moving on to page 11 on module 5. In this activity, you will investigate the role of parentheses in expressions containing exponents. So identify the base or the basis and exponents in each. Then write each power as a product. Finally, evaluate the power. So this is 5 to the 3rd power, or we also call it 5 cubed. So that means we are multiplying 5 3 for 3 times. It's not 5 times 3, it's 5 times 5 times 5. So let me show you in a second. So 5 times 5 times 5 is 125. So the answer to this is 125. So the base would be 5 and exponent is 3. All right, moving on to B, negative 9 in parentheses to the 5th power. That means this whole thing, it's not just 9, it's negative 9 because the negative is also included in the parentheses. We're multiplying negative 9 5 times. So negative 9 times negative 9 times negative 9 times negative 9 times negative 9 is equal to negative 59,049. So the base here, it's not just going to be 9, it's negative 9. Exponent is 5. C is, notice how C does not have parentheses around negative 11, right? That means the base would just be 11. Exponent is still 3. But since the negative was not included in the parentheses, or there was no parentheses around it, the only base is 11, not negative 11. So that's the difference between having a parentheses around the base and not having the parentheses. Okay, so in this case, since it's a negative out in the front, it's negative 1 times 11 times 11 times 11. So 11 is being multiplied 3 times. Okay, 11 times 11 times 11. But since there's a negative, we just have to put a negative, or negative 1. Okay, so we multiply it, we get 1,331, but there's a negative because there's negative 1. Okay, so another way of thinking about this would be like you just multiply negative 11 once times positive 11, 11. Okay, but this would be the proper way of solving it. All right, and moving on to D. So this is 4 is being raised to the 5th power, 3 is being raised to the 6th power. The bases are 4 and 3. Okay, 4 and 3. Exponents are 5 and 6. So the first one, we have 4 is being multiplied 5 times. So 4 times 4 times 4 times 4 times 4. Okay, 5 times. And 3 for 6 times. So 3 times 3 times 3 times 3 times 3 times 3. When you solve that, you get 746,496. Number 2, write each as a product. Product is an answer to a multiplication problem, and then calculate the product. So this is negative 1 squared, or negative 1 to the 2nd power. So it is going to be negative 1 because there is no parentheses, remember, so it's negative 1 times 1 times 1. So these 1 and 1 are coming from this exponent. See, 1 is being multiplied 2 times, so 1, 1. This negative 1 is coming from this negative. So negative 1 times 1 times 1, it's negative 1. Negative 1 cubed, negative 1 to the 3rd power. Same thing, all you gotta do is negative 1 times 1 times 1 times 1. Okay, so 1 for 3 times, and there's negative, so it's negative 1. it's still going to be negative 1. The next one, negative 1 to the 4th power, so negative 1 times 1, 1, 1, 1. And the answer is still going to be negative 1. Same thing for this, negative 1 for this negative, and 1 for 5 times. The answer is still negative 1. Now for E, notice how they are the same thing for A as A, but this one has a parentheses around the base. So the base for this was just 1. Base for this is negative 1. Okay, so it's going to be negative 1 is being raised to the power of 2. That means negative 1 times negative 1. So it's a positive 1. Here, negative 1 times negative 1 times negative 1 is equal to negative 1. Negative 1 times negative 1 times negative 1 times negative 1 is positive 1. Now negative 1 is being multiplied by 5 times, and we get a negative 1. So what conclusion can you draw about a negative number raised to an odd power? So a negative number being raised to an odd power. So this is odd, so that was a negative. This is odd, negative, right? So the product will be negative. What conclusion can you draw about a negative number raised to an even power? So negative number being raised to an even power, which is a positive number. Negative number raised to a positive, even power, it's a positive number. So the product will be positive.